So, hello and welcome back. We are back with Ivanhoe, where I'm starting to enjoy this more. Like the first chapter or two, not gonna lie, I was a little bit leery. And, well, I keep complaining about the language being obtuse at times. I see the story, and it kind of charms me because I see so many other stories that I feel like came from this story. I mean, I know that Robin Hood was not invented by Sir Walter Scott. I know that a lot of the medieval tales probably weren't invented by him, but I see so many different pieces of media that I feel like drew inspiration from this. And I don't know, I could be just totally talking out of my rear end because research is not my strong suit, but that's the way I'm seeing it anyway. And yeah, in the last chapter, our disinherited knight, who I personally believe is Ivanhoe, and I personally also believe is the Pilgrim, he won his matches. He dehorsed or broke the lances and beat all five of the champions of King John or Prince John, who definitely was very upsetty spaghetti about that and a little bit nervous. And he, our disinherited knight, has picked his queen of love and beauty, Rowena, who I don't know if she's pretending that she doesn't speak French or if she genuinely doesn't, but Rowena, Cedric, and the Disinherited Knight all basically turned their noses up at Prince John's invitation for a banquet. And that's kind of where we left it, with the Disinherited Knight just kind of kicking back and going to sleep, and Cedric and Rowena going back to, I'm assuming, their own encampment. And tomorrow will be another day of merriment, question mark. And also some sort of an archery competition is coming, which if this doesn't end up being the entire trope from Robin Hood, where Robin Hood splits the arrow with another arrow, I'm going to be really disappointed. Anyway, as always, we are going to be beginning it with a quote from another book, which is an interestingly titled other book that I've never heard of, and then we'll be jumping into chapter 10 of Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. Thus, like the sad presaging raven that tolls the sick man's passport in her hollow beak, and in the shadow of the silent night doth shake contagion from her sable wings, vexed and tormented runs poor Barabbas with fatal curses towards these Christians. And that was from a book called The Jew of Malta, or a poem, or something dense and obscure. And now on to chapter 10. The Disinherited Knight had no sooner reached his pavilion than squires and pages in abundance tendered their services to disarm him, to bring fresh attire, and to offer him the refreshment of the bath. Their zeal on this occasion was perhaps sharpened by curiosity, since everyone desired to know who the knight was that had gained so many laurels, yet had refused, even upon the command of Prince John, to lift his visor or tell his name. But their officious inquisitiveness was not gratified. The Disinherited Knight refused all other assistance save that of his own squire, or rather his yeoman, a clownish-looking man who, wrapped in a cloak of dark-colored felt and having his head and face half buried in a Norman bonnet of black fur, seemed to affect the incognito just as much as his master. Everyone else being excluded from the tent, this attendant relieved his master from the more burdensome parts of his armor, and placed food and wine in front of him, which the exertions of the day rendered quite acceptable. The knight had scarce finished a very hasty meal ere his menial announced to him that 5 men, each leading a barbed steed, wanted to speak with him. The Disinherited Knight had exchanged his armor for the long robe usually worn by those of his condition, which, being furnished with a hood, concealed his face, when such was the pleasure of the wearer, anyway. It did it almost as completely as the visor of the helmet itself, but the twilight, which was now quickly darkening, would of itself have rendered a disguise unnecessary, unless the people to whom the faces of an individual chanced to be particularly well known. The Disinherited Knight, therefore, stepped boldly forth to the front of his tent, and found in attendance the squires of the challengers, whom he easily knew by their russet and black clothing, each of which led his master's charger loaded with the armor in which he had upon that day fought. "According to the laws of chivalry," said the front man, "I, Baldwin de Only, squire to the redoubted Knight Brian de Bois Guilbert, make offer to you, styling yourself for now the Disinherited Knight, of the horse and armor used by the said Brian de Bois Guilbert in this day's passage of arms, leaving it with your nobleness to retain or to ransom the same according to your pleasure, as is the law of arm." The other squires repeated almost the same formula, and then stood to await the decision of the Disinherited Knight. "To you, 4 sirs," said the knight, addressing the ones who had last spoken, "and to your honorable and valiant masters, I have one common reply. Commend me to the noble knights, your masters, and say I should do ill to deprive them of steeds and arms, which can never be used by braver cavaliers. I would I could ere end my message to these gallant knights, but being, as I term myself, in truth and earnest, disinherited, I must be thus far bound to your masters that they will, of their courtesy, be pleased to ransom their steeds and armor, since that which I wear can hardly be termed my own." "We stand commissioned, each of us," said the squire of Reginald Front de Bœuf, "to offer 100 zecchins in ransom of these horses and suits of armor." "It's sufficient," said the Disinherited Knight. "Half the sum my present necessities compel me to accept. Of the remaining half, distribute 1 moiety among yourselves, sir squires, and divide the other half betwixt the heralds and the pursuivants and the minstrels and the attendants." The squires, cap in hand and low reverences, expressed their same deep sense of a courtesy and generosity not often practiced, at least not upon such an extensive scale. The Disinherited Knight then addressed his speech to Baldwin, the squire of Brian de Bois Guilbert. "From your master," he said, "I will accept neither arms or ransom. Say to him in my name that our strife is not ended. No, not till we have fought as well with swords as lances, as well on foot as on horseback. To this mortal quarrel he has himself defined me, and I will not forget the challenge. Meanwhile, let him be assured that I hold him not as one of his companions, with whom I can with pleasure exchange courtesy, but rather as one with whom I stand upon terms of mortal defiance." "My master," said Baldwin, "knows how to requite scorn with scorn, and blows with blows, as well as courtesy to courtesy. Since you disdain to accept from him any share of the ransom at which you have rated the arms of the other knights, I must leave his armor and his horse here, being well assured he will never deign to mount the one or wear the other. You've spoken well, good squire, said the Disinherited Knight, well and boldly, as it beseemeth him to speak who answers for an absent master. Leave not, however, the horse and armor here. Restore them to thy master, or, if he scorns to accept them, keep them, good friend, for your own. So far as they are mine, I bestow them upon you freely. Baldwin made a deep bow and retired with his companions, and the Disinherited Knight went back into his pavilion. So far, Gurth, he said, now speaking to his attendant, the reputation of English chivalry hath suffered not at my hands. And I, said Gurth, for a Saxon swineherd, have not ill played the personage of a Norman squire at arms. Yea, but, said the Disinherited Knight, thou hast ever kept me in anxiety, lest thou clownish bearing should discover thee. Oh, tush, said Gurth, I fear discovery from no one, saving my playfellow Wamba the jester, of whom I could never discover whether he were mostly knave or mostly fool. Yet I could scarce choose but laugh when my old master passed so near to me, dreaming all the while that Gurth was keeping his porkers many a mile away in the thickets and swamps of Rotherwood. If I'm discovered... Enough, said the Disinherited Knight. Thou knowest my promise. Nay, for that matter, said Gurth, I will never fail my friend, for fear of my skin cutting. I have a tough hide that will bear knife or whip as well as any boar's hide, though. Trust me, I will requite the risk that you run for my love, Gurth, said the knight. Meanwhile, I pray you to accept 10 pieces of gold. I am richer, Gurth answered, putting the gold in his pouch, than ever was a swineherd or a bondsman. Now, take this bag of gold to Ashby, said the knight, and find out Isaac of York, and let him pay himself for the horse and the arms with which his credit supplied me. No, no, by St. Dunstan, said Gurth, that I will not do. How, knave, said his master, will you not obey my commands? If they're honest, reasonable, Christian commands, said Gurth. But this is none of these. To suffer Isaac to pay himself would be dishonest, for it would be cheating my master, and unreasonable, for it were the part of a fool, and unchristian, since it would be plundering a believer to enrich an infidel. See him contented, however, you stubborn varlet, said the Disinherited Knight. I'll do so, said Gurth, taking the bag under his cloak and leaving the tent. And it will go hard, he muttered, but I content him with 1/2 of his own asking. And saying this, he departed, leaving the Disinherited Knight to his own perplexed thoughts, which, upon more accounts than is now possible to communicate to you, the reader, were of a nature that was peculiarly agitating and quite painful. We must now change the scene to the village of Ashby, or rather to a country house in its vicinity belonging to a wealthy Israelite with whom Isaac, his daughter, and his entire retinue had taken up quarters. The people, it is well known, being as liberal in exercising the duties of hospitality and charity among their own people, as they were said to be reluctant in extending them to those that they termed Gentiles, and whose treatment of them certainly merited no hospitality from them. In an apartment, small but richly furnished with decorations of an oriental taste, Rebecca was seated on a heap of embroidered cushions which, piled along a low platform that surrounded her chamber, served like the estrada of the Spaniards instead of chairs. She was watching the motions of her father with a look of anxious and filial affection, while he paced the apartment with a dejected air and a disordered step, sometimes clapping his hands together, sometimes casting his eyes to the roof of the apartment as one laboring under mental tribulation. "Oh, Jacob!" he exclaimed. "Oh, all ye 12 holy fathers of our tribe, what a losing venture this is for one who hath daily kept every jot and tittle of the law! 50 zecchins, wrenched from me at one time by the talons of that tyrant." "But, father," said Rebecca, "you seem to give the gold to Prince John willingly." "Willingly? A blotch of Egypt upon him, willingly, you say? Ay, as willingly as when the Gulf of Lyons I flung over my merchandise to lighten the ship, while she labored through a tempest, robbed the seething billows in my choice silk, and perfumed the briny foam with myrrh and aloe, and I enriched the sea's caverns with gold and silver. And was not that hour of unutterable misery, even though my own hands did it?" "But it was the sacrifice which heaven exacted to save our lives," said Rebecca. "And the God of our fathers has since blessed your store and your gatherings." "Ay," said Isaac, "but if the tyrant lays hold on them as he did today, and compels me to smile while he robs me? Oh, daughter, disinherited and wandering as we are, the worst evil which befalls us is that when we are wronged and plundered, the world laughs, and we are told to suppress our sense of injury and to smile when we would better be suited to revenge." "Don't think upon it, my father," said Rebecca. "We also have advantages. These Gentiles, cruel and oppressive as they are in some way dependent upon the dispersed children of Zion, who they hate and persecute. Without the aid of our wealth, they could neither furnish forth their hosts in war, or furnish their triumph in peace. And the gold which we lend them returns with increase to our own coffers. We're like the herb which flourishes the most when it's stepped on. Even this day's pageant had not proceeded without the consent of you, who furnished the money for it." "Daughter," said Isaac, "thou hast harped upon another string of sorrow. The goodly steed and the rich armor, equal to the full profit of my adventure with our Kiljath Jearim of Leicester, that's a dead loss. Ay, a loss which swallows up all the gains of this week, ay, of the space between 2 Sabbaths, and yet it may end better than I now think. He's a good youth." "Assuredly," said Rebecca, "you shall not repent you of requiting the good deed that you received from the strange knight." "I trust that," said Isaac. "And I trust, too, in the rebuilding of Zion, but as well do I hope with my own bloody eyes to see the walls and battlements of the new temple as to see a Christian, yea, even the best of Christians, repay a debt to a Jewish man, unless under the awe of a judge and jailer." And after he said that, he resumed his discontented pacing through the apartment, and Rebecca, seeing that her attempts at consolation only seemed to awaken new subjects for him to complain about, wisely desisted from her efforts, a prudential line of conduct, We recommend it to all who set up for comforts and advisors to follow it if the same circumstance arises. The evening was now becoming dark, when a servant entered the apartment and placed upon the table two silver lamps fed by perfumed oil. The richest wines and the most delicate refreshments were at that very same time displayed by another domestic upon a small ebony table inlaid with silver. For the interior of their houses, the people refuse themselves no small indulgences ever. At the same time, the servant told Isaac that a Nazarene, so they termed Christians when they spoke amongst themselves, wished to speak with him. He that would live by traffic must hold himself at the disposal of everyone who claimed business with him, so Isaac at once replaced upon the table the untasted glass of Greek wine which he had just brought to his lips, and turning and saying to his daughter, "Rebecca, veil yourself," told the stranger to come in. Just as Rebecca dropped over her beautiful face a screen of silver gauze which reached to her feet, the door opened, and Gurth entered, wrapped in the ample folds of his Norman mantle. His appearance was more suspicious than prepossessing, especially as, instead of doffing his bonnet, he pulled it still lower over his brow. "Art thou Isaac?" said Gurth, in Saxon. "I am," said Isaac in the same language, for his traffic had rendered every tongue spoken in Britain familiar to him. "And who art thou?" "That is not to thy purpose," said Gurth. "As much as my name is to you," said Isaac, "for without knowing yours, how may I speak with you?" "Easily," said Gurth. "I, being to pay money, must know that I deliver it to the right person. You, who are to receive it, will not, I think, care very greatly by whose hands it comes." "Oh," said Isaac, "you come to pay money? Holy Father Abraham! That alters our relations with each other. From who do you bring it?" "From the disinherited knight," said Gurth, "victor in this day's tournament. It is the price of the armor supplied to him by Kirjath Jarim of Leicester, upon your recommendation. The steed is restored to your stable. I desire to know the amount of the sum which I am to pay for the armor." "I told you he was a good boy," said Isaac, with a joyful smile. "A cup of wine will do thee no harm," he said, filling and handing to the swineherd a richer draught than Gurth had ever before drank. "And how much money," said Isaac, "have you brought with you?" "Holy Virgin!" said Gurth, putting the cup down. "What nectar these unbelieving dogs drink, whilst true Christians are fain to quaff ale as muddy and thick as the draught that we give to the hogs. What money have I brought with me?" he continued, when he finished his uncivil words. "Even but a small sum. Something in hand the whilst, though. What, Isaac? You must have a conscience, even if you are Jewish." "Nay, but," said Isaac, "thy mayor is one goodly steeds in rich armors, with the strength of his lance in his right hand. But he's a good boy. The people will take these in present payment, and render him back the excess." "My master has disposed of them already." "Oh, that was wrong," said Isaac. "That was the part of a fool. No Christian here could buy this many horses and armor. No one except myself would give him even half of the value. But you have 100 zecchins with you in that bag," said Isaac. "It looks to be a heavy bag." I have heads for crossbow bolts in it, said Girth. Well then, said Isaac, panting and hesitating between his habitual love of making money and a newly born desire to be liberal this time. If I should say that I would take 80 zecchins for the good steed and the rich armor, which leaves me not a guilder of profit, do you have enough to pay me? Barely, said Girth, though the sum demanded was more reasonable than he was expecting. And it will leave my master nigh penniless. None the less, if that is your least offer, I have to take it. Fill yourself another goblet of wine, said Isaac. 80 zecchins is too little. It leaves no profit for the usage of the money. And besides, the good horse may have suffered wrongly in this day's encounter. It was a hard and dangerous meeting, man and steed rushing on each other like wild bulls of Bashan. The horse could have gotten injured. And I tell you, said Girth, the horse is sound of wind and limb, and you may now go see him in your stable. And I say over and above that 70 zecchins is enough for the armor, and I hope that a Christian's word is as good as a Jew's. If you will not take 70, then I will carry this bag, and he shook it until the contents jingled, all the way back to my master. No, said Isaac. Lay down the talents, the shekels, the 80 zecchins, and you will see I will consider you liberally. Girth at length complied, and counting out 80 zecchins on the table, Isaac delivered out to him an acquittance for the horse and the suit of armor. Isaac's hand trembled with joy as he wrapped up the first 70 pieces of gold. The last 10 he told over with much deliberation, pausing and saying something as he took each piece from the table and dropped it into his purse. It seemed as if his avarice was struggling with his better nature and compelling him to pouch zecchin after zecchin, while his generosity urged him to restore some part at least to his benefactor, or as a donation to his agents. What he was saying was this: 71, 72, your master is a good boy. 73, an excellent boy. 74, that piece hath been clipped within the ring. 75, and that looketh light of weight. 76, when thy master wants money, let him come to Isaac's. 77, that is, with reasonable security, anyway. Here he made a considerable pause, and Girth had good hope that the last 3 pieces might escape the fate of their comrades, but the counting continued. 78, thou art a good fellow. 79, you deserve a little something for yourself. Here Isaac paused again and looked at the last zecchine, intending no doubt to bestow it upon Girth. He weighed it on the tip of his finger and made it ring by dropping it on the table. If it had rung too flat, or had it felt a hair's breadth too light, generosity would carry the day, but unhappily for Girth, the chime was full and true, the zecchin was plump, newly coined, and even a little bit above true weight. Isaac could not find it in his heart to part with it, so he dropped it into his purse as if in absence of mind, with the words, 80 completes it, and I trust that your master will reward you handsomely. Surely, he said, looking at the bag, you have more money in there. Girth grinned, which was as close as he ever got to a laugh, as he said, about the same amount which thou hast just told over so carefully. He then folded the quittance and put it under his cap, adding, Peril, sir, see that this be full and ample. And he filled for himself, unbidden, a 3rd goblet of the wine, and left the apartment with no ceremony at all. Rebecca, said Isaac. That Ishmaelite hath gone somewhat beyond me. None the less, his master is a good boy. Yes, and I am well pleased that he hath gained shekels of gold and shekels of silver, even by the speed of his horse and the strength of his lance, which, like that of Goliath the Philistine, might vie with a weaver's beam. As he turned to receive Rebecca's answer, he saw that during his chattering with Gurth, she had left the apartment without him noticing. In the meanwhile, Gurth had descended the stair, and having reached the dark antechamber or hallway, was looking around to discover the entrance, when a figure in white, shown by a small silver lamp that she held in her hand, beckoned him into a side room. Gurth had some reluctance to obey the summons. Rough and impetuous as a wild boar, where only earthly force was to be apprehended, he had all the characteristic terror of a Saxton respecting fauns, forest fiends, white women, and the whole of the superstitions with which his ancestors had brought from the wilds of Germany. He remembered, moreover, that he was in the house of someone Jewish, a people who, besides the other unamiable qualities which popular report ascribed to them, were supposed to be profound necromancers. But after a moment's pause, he obeyed the beckoning summons of the apparition and followed her into the apartment which she indicated, where he found to his joyful surprise that his fair guide was the beautiful woman that he had seen at the tournament, and briefly in her father's apartment. She asked him the particulars of his transaction with her father, which he detailed accurately. "My father was joking with you, my good man," said Rebecca. "He owes thy master deeper kindness than these arms and steed could pay, for even if they were 10 times as expensive. What sum did you pay my father?" 80 zecchins, said Gurth. "In my purse," said Rebecca, "you will find 100. Restore to your master that which is due, and enrich yourself with the remainder. Quickly, be gone. Stay not to render any thanks, and beware how you pass through this crowded town, where you might easily lose both your burden and your life. Reuben," she said, clapping her hands together, "light forth this stranger, and do not fail to draw the lock and bar behind him." Reuben, a dark-haired, black-bearded Israelite, obeyed her summons with a torch, and he undid the outward door of the house, conducting Gurth across a paved court. Then he led him out through a wicket in the entrance gate, which he closed behind him with such bolts and chains as would well have become the walls of a prison. "By St. Dunstan," said Gurth, as he stumbled up the dark avenue, that woman is an angel from heaven. 10 zecchins from my brave young master, 20 from this peril of Zion. Happy day! Such another, Gurth, will redeem your bondage, and make thee a brother as free of thy guild as the best of them. And then I will lay down my swineherd's horn and staff, and take the freeman's sword and buckler up, and follow my young master even unto the death, without hiding my face or my name." And that was the end of the chapter. That was not the chapter I was expecting. I was really expecting that we were going to have day 2 of the tournament and the Queen of Love and Beauty and all of that. Intrigue. You know, I do appreciate that you can tell Sir Walter Scott is not, at least on purpose, perpetuating any bad stereotypes about any people except maybe the Normans. But still, it's one of those topics I'm trying to dance around and make sure that there's no vile sentiments expressed. Even if this book is over 100 years old, they're not my sentiments. And sometimes they're icky to say out loud. So I doubt I'm going to call anyone any really bad names, even if it's printed in the text. But so far, so good. It hasn't been. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. That was a good chapter. I like that chapter. I also still really like Isaac, and now I super like Rebecca. I hope that Rowena is just as nice, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see till we get a little more time with her. So thank you as always. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out. It does always make me smile. And I will see you tomorrow.